Hello, this is Strategy Miscellany here with another design video. So I did a video a while back about how to build good ships with stock modules, and I did not know nearly as much about the game then as I do now. I've been talking to people on the Discord, looking at the forums. I shout out a couple people in the credits who were quite helpful. One person in particular who also has a YouTube channel and just wanted to basically revisit that older video and hopefully give some better advice than last time. So basically, in my view, there's three main ways you can improve on the base game stock ships without making your own modules while still using the stock games modules. So number one is layout. You can make sure your ship is properly front facing or properly broadside. Properly front facing is usually easier and better. And also just make sure that your crew cabin isn't right in the front if it's a front facing ship, um, and that your core parts of the ship are somewhat protected, and that your fuel tanks are fairly small so that one doesn't get destroyed and take out your whole fuel stock or cause the ship to spin around and kill the crew with G-forces. So, second thing is picking the right modules. Some of the stock modules are actually quite good. Some of the stock modules are basically useless. And so figuring out which ones you want to use is a big part of design. And then the third thing is the armor scheme. It's important to have a Whipple shield, which I'll explain. It's important to choose the right thing for your bulk, have some kind of anti-laser shield, and have some kind of anti-spalling final layer on the inside. So, given all that, I will pull up the game, show some example ships in different roles, and how I think they improve on the base game designs, and then I'll show off them in a little bit of AI versus AI combat. Show off some of them anyway. So let's get started. So I've got these 6 designs here marked core, which are all made entirely from stock modules, and I'll just kind of go through them one by one here. I'll go ahead and start with the example broadsider. So this is a ship that's designed properly to turn broadside and fight that way. You can see how it has all its guns on this side. You can see how it's got sloped armor on that side. You can see how all the radiators are safely on the back of the ship. So long as this is oriented broadside, it's in a pretty good position, and it does have some RCS chemical rockets, methane and liquid oxygen, on the sides here in order to improve its ability to turn quickly into broadside mode. Then for weapons, it has one 4mm internal railgun here, basically just to force it to turn broadside. Sometimes the AI is not great at turning broadside unless you have a non-turreted weapon facing that direction. Then it's got one 13 megawatt laser, and it's got 6 mounts for it in case some of them get shot off. And then it has 4 of these 11mm rail guns here. Let me show you real quick. So this is probably the weaker railgun of the two that I would say are probably the best. It's the turreted railgun as opposed to the auto-fire railgun. And so if we look at it here, um, it's not a great muzzle velocity. It's only 3.33 kilometers per second. The advantage of this guy is that its reload is 5 milliseconds. And so even though it uses 13 megawatts when firing, basically it only needs that for the time when it is firing. And so because of that, I can power multiple of these railguns off of the same 13 megawatt reactor. It's kind of an odd system the way that Children of Dead Earth does it, because the fastest any individual gun can fire, as I understand it, is 1 per frame, so 1/30th of a second. And if the gun is faster than that, it won't actually fire any faster. But the advantage is it will only use the electrical power for the time when it is firing. Which in this case, this doesn't have a capacitor. It's capacitorless, so it only uses the power when it's actually shooting the bullet basically out of the railgun. So only for 1 millisecond. So that means I can bolt 4 of these guys on. They'll all basically fire 1 frame per second on one 13 megawatt reactor. The other 13 megawatt reactor powers the laser. And so that's the main thing to look at. I got the nuclear rockets in the back. I got the combustion rockets in the front here, right here on the corners. I got the crew module here. There might be better places to put the crew module, but it's okay anyway. And then the armor scheme, so it's square, of course, and it's got a bit of a squished aspect ratio to make the sloped armor better at being sloped armor. So going from outermost to innermost, it starts with 2 millimeters of aluminum oxynitride. This is an anti-flash layer, basically anti-nuclear blasts. The aluminum will melt in a nuclear fire, and so you need something that's sturdier with a higher melting point above your aluminum outer shell if you have an aluminum outer shell. This also sort of works as a Whipple shield, although I think it's more likely to shatter than to deform, so it's not ideal. So that's why I've put 15 centimeters in between it and the aluminum. The idea is a high velocity projectile hits this outer layer, turns into plasma, and then the plasma sort of spends itself against the next layer and doesn't break through the way a solid projectile would. So the real Whipple shield starts with this 5 millimeters, half centimeter of aluminum. It's ductile, and so the projectile will hit it and basically punch a hole through it and hopefully get turned to plasma at the same time without producing a lot of little shards that will cause their own damage. So then it's got a foot of spacing before it gets to, which is ideally you want more than that for a Whipple shield probably, but you also don't want your ship to get too much larger because it makes a bigger target, makes it heavier, all kinds of things. So it's all a balancing act. So then we've got half a centimeter of titanium. And then we have 2 layers that are only on the front side of the ship. So we have 8 millimeters of aramid fiber and 1.2 centimeters of vanadium chromium steel, the strongest steel in the game. The aramid fiber is actually pretty good anti-ballistic, but it's really there for its anti-laser properties. With the base game setup, it's basically the strongest material, centimeter for centimeter, against lasers. It's also quite expensive. And so the idea is that these 2 layers are just on the front-facing side of the ship. They're rotated 75% so that they cover basically this half, and they cover 52% of it so that they cover all the way up to these corners plus a tiny bit extra. I also gave the ship a little front cap of VCS, vanadium chromium steel, on the back side of it so that this little kind of front area is covered basically in case the ship takes a little bit of time to turn fully broadside. In case it gets jumped, basically, it's got a little bit of a defensive front cap. And then on the very inside, we have an anti-spalling layer of spider silk. You don't want something that's going to shatter for your anti-spalling layer, and you want something strong enough to catch basically fragments of metal that bounce out of or break out of the bulk armor layer above it when it gets hit by impacts. And so that's what your anti-spalling layer is for. Other things to note on this ship, it's got a bunch of smaller methane tanks, 100-ton methane tanks, instead of the larger ones. That way, if one tank is destroyed, it doesn't destroy the whole ship. It's got some small oxygen tanks in order to power the RCS thrusters. And it's got these 13.5 megawatt thermoelectric fission reactors, which do require a decent amount of radiator space. Thankfully, it can all fit on the back of the ship without too much trouble. So that's my example broadsider. In general, I'd recommend building front-facing ships, but broadsiders can be kind of fun to experiment with, and they look cool. There's a sort of Age of Sail drama to them moving into position. So that's that guy. Next up, we have the Gunskiff 2.0. This is basically an attempt at taking the base game Gunskiff and making a better version. So if we look at the base game Gunskiff, it has a flat front, which is not great. It has a not great armor setup, although it's okay. And it has these non-turreted railguns, which are usually kind of difficult to get into place. On the other hand, it's got these four nice conventional cannons. If you're going to go with conventional cannons, 60 millimeter conventional is one of the best stock modules. And um, it's very, very cheap based on compared to the other stock ships and very, very small. So you can get a lot of these, or you can kind of stick one in with extra room. And that's kind of what my gun skiff is meant to emulate. So the gun skiff 2.0, it's slightly larger and slightly more expensive. It doesn't have the rail guns, but it has 5 instead of 4 conventional cannons. It's got a pointy nose. It's designed well for facing straight forwards, and it actually produces even less. It requires even less radiator room because I got rid of the rail guns, and so the whole thing can run on less reactors. Take a look here. So this guy's running on one of the smallest fission reactors, one 234 kilowatt fission reactor. And so because of that, it just doesn't need that much radiator space. And I believe I overbuilt radiators in case some of these get shut off too. So then we've got our armor scheme. It's kind of an attempt at a cheaper armor scheme for the ship being small here. It's got a little copper racing stripe. 500 micrometers is all, half a millimeter. Adds a little bit of weight, but gives it a nice little stylistic racing stripe. I'm of the opinion that you can't put a price on style. You got to make your ships look good. What else? Otherwise, what are you doing? Then we got boron carbide. Lovely ceramic there. Good anti-nuclear flash layer. Good sort of outer layer. We got 6 millimeters aluminum. That's our kind of Whipple layer, or our second Whipple layer. And in this case, I've built a semi-stuffed Whipple shield. So there's 10 centimeters of blank space, and then there's 10 centimeters of graphite aerogel. Now, graphite aerogel is a fascinating thing. You can see here its density is 8.5 kilograms per cubic meter. That's literally lighter than air. Now, unfortunately, you cannot, or at least they haven't figured out how to take a big block of graphite aerogel and have it literally float in the air because it's lighter than air and make a zeppelin out of it. Because the problem is it gets air in all of its little nooks and crannies if it's not in a vacuum. And so you could try vacuum sealing it, but I think the pressure of the outside air would be enough to crush it, and therefore you can't build your amazing graphogel zeppelin. At least not yet. Maybe someday. We can dream. But graphite aerogel is great because it's incredibly light. Because it's incredibly light, it's not that expensive. Because, I mean, sure, it's 40 credits per kilogram, but there aren't that many kilograms in there. It's heat resistant. It's actually reasonably strong. And basically, this will just help dissipate any plasma that's created or any shrapnel that's created when the aluminum layer gets hit. Then we've got our aluminum layer here. Or, sorry, our titanium layer. It's not as good a bulk armor as vanadium chromium steel, which is probably the best, or even something like amorphous zirconium steel, which is maybe second best, or boron filament, that's another good one, but it's fairly cheap. Yes, in the space future, titanium is pretty cheap, and it also is pretty light compared to a lot of the other metals out there. And then we've got our anti-spalling layer, half a centimeter of spider silk. Now, how they're harvesting the spider silk is never really made clear. It's maybe synthetic. I'd like to imagine it's transgenic goats that produce spider silk in their milk, and they're being grazed under the rubber trees that produce the nitrile rubber on the terraformed plains of Mars or in the domes of Mars, something like that. It's a very, very romantic view if you think about it. So, anyway, that's the Gunskiff 2.0. It's not great on its own, but it's good to provide a little bit of extra firepower when you get into close combat, to provide a little bit of a distraction for other ships. And the nice thing is, because its heat signature is pretty low, it's not going to attract much missile fire. So it can sort of fly under the radar in that sense if it's got larger ships around it. So, third ship we've got here is a laser corvette. This is my sort of attempt at kind of a mid-range laser ship. It's larger and more powerful than a laser skiff, but it's weaker than but also cheaper and lighter than a laser frigate. It has 3 13 megawatt lasers and 8 laser turrets for them, and they can all fire forwards, or they can fire to the sides given where they are. and it has two 13 megawatt auto fire railguns, which really I think the 11 millimeter auto fire railgun is pretty much the best stock projectile weapon, at least in the game. It's it's got a fast firing rate here. I'll pull it up in module design just so we can look at its stats real quick. So the auto fire railgun, 6.5 kilometers per second. You know, not as good as something you could build yourself, but respectable, especially for a stock module. 10-gram rounds, so we're not talking just a sandblaster here. It's got a little bit of punch behind it. Reload is 69 milliseconds, so it's going to fire every 3 frames. So, going to fire 10 times a second. Seems like it should fire more, but this is where, if you've ever seen one of those speedrunning explanation videos, this is where you put in the explanation about waiting for a bus. And so even though we get there at 69 milliseconds, we have to wait till 99.9 milliseconds until the bus gets there, in this case the bus being the frame. And so it really only fires once every 3 frames, unfortunately. But not too expensive, and has a good turreting range, and really is just pretty good at putting a large amount of railgun fire downrange without taking huge amounts of electrical power, or without some of the problems some of these other weapons have. Like, I mean, the scatter railgun, it's okay, but even slower fire rate. A lot of spread, so it's actually going to miss a decent amount. Not accurate at great ranges. Requires 39 megawatts. That's a lot, especially when you can't build your own reactors and you got to stick with stock reactors. Or, I mean, coil guns. There's some of them that are just even worse. I mean, the sniper coil gun is good. I definitely use that some. It may only fire a little under once every half second. So a little bit less than twice a second, but fires 50-gram rounds real fast. That's a lot of energy going down range. It's accurate at fairly long ranges for a stock module, and it's, you know, not huge. You can fit it on a ship fairly decently. Then you've got this turreted capacitor coil gun here, and it's just immense. It's got a bunch of little capacitors down here. I think that's what's making it so immense. And so even though it's just firing this little 1-gram round, it's got this huge turret that's just going to get shot off. And is also really heavy, really expensive. It just is not practical. The flak coil gun fires flak. That seems like it should be cool, but it fires it even slower than your average conventional gun. Just not great. Heavy coil gun is nice, but it only fires every 6.25 seconds. That's way too slow. And then I would say these ones are just too power hungry for a stock ship, generally. You might be able to find a good use for them, but generally I haven't anyway. And then the internal capacitor coil gun, again, problem is, well, slow fire rate, especially once it overheats, which it will do instantly. And any non-turreted weapon on a ship larger than the smallest of ships that's very maneuverable is going to find it very hard to actually get a firing solution and hit its target. So going back to ship design, we've got the laser corvette. And so, yeah, basically the idea is it can fire 3 lasers at once. It's great for defending against missile barrages, against drone attacks to some extent. It's good for attacking enemy laser mounts and turrets, so they're trying to burn off enemy weapons on their ships. It's got this gold cap. It's got this bismuth backside here. Both of those are just decorative 0.5 millimeter pieces. It's got silicon nitride and then aluminum. Then it's got graphite aerogel, 15 centimeters. This is another stuffed Whipple shield, or at least semi-stuffed. I think I put a gap between the aluminum and the graphite. Then this one I tried 2 centimeters of boron filament. That is a good material to use for armor, especially if you don't want to spring for vanadium chromium steel. Here, I'll look at it real quick. So you can see boron filament. It only costs 23 credits a kilogram. It's quite light. It only weighs 2.5 times as much as water. About maybe half the weight or something like iron, I think. And its tensile and yield strength are both 4 gigapascals. That's almost as good as vanadium chromium steel. So definitely a good option there. This one uses for its anti-laser and sort of for a spalling layer, it uses nitrile rubber. And then it's got spider silk as the innermost anti-spalling layer. So that's the idea with this one here. It does require a couple of radiation shields to keep the crew happy. I think I've got like one here. And actually, what is the other one doing? Why is that one? Did I put a reactor up here? Let me see if I delete this one, if anything happens. Okay, so that was a superfluous radiation shield. So we'll disregard that. And yeah, it does require a lot of radiator capacity because it's got to power all these three green lasers and these autofire railguns. So it's got 4 fission reactors, so it can power all 3 lasers in one railgun or 2 lasers and 2 railguns, depending on what it needs to do at the given moment. That's the laser corvette. Then we've got the missile boat. This is just supposed to be a simple ship to basically carry some missiles and then send them off, so didn't want it to be too expensive. It doesn't actually have any weapons of its own. It has a decoy blast launcher in case it's targeted by missiles. But the idea is this ship would never operate independently. It would have at least like a gunskiff 2.0 next to it to guard it. And also, it wouldn't attack its enemy directly. It would fire a bunch of missiles off at them. It runs on decane just to give it something different. I tried a slightly different armor scheme. It's really pretty similar, except for I put in some of this ultra high molecular weight polyethylene because I was redoing some reading about this being potentially a good anti-laser layer. Probably for unrealistic reasons. I think it has something to do with the game choosing anti-laser defense based on how many atoms are in the average molecule of your material, and this being a polymer, it's got a lot. It uses alpha 2 titanium aluminide. That's another bulk layer I like to use sometimes. It's got pretty good yield and tensile strength. It's pretty cheap. It's pretty light. It's sort of maybe a step above titanium in terms of the cost versus quality spectrum, but fairly similar to titanium, really, because, I mean, it's a titanium alloy after all. So what this has, it's got 1 flak missile launcher with 50 flak missiles attached, and it's got 2 sniper nuclear missile launchers with 50 with 25 nuclear missiles attached. So let me just look at these real quick. Let me look at what those missiles are like again. So the flak missiles are kind of your bread and butter missiles in the game. They're good especially to bring along with nuclear missiles so that you can have them as kind of a backup. They have 1.89 kilometers per second delta V. They have a little flak bomb. They're not super armored, but you send them in a swarm. Some of them will get through. As long as they're going fast enough, the flak bug won't ruin them. That's where if the flak only survives 1 frame on screen before the game deletes it to save on memory. So you got to make sure your flak impacts the target like right after this detonates. So you got to have a fast closing speed. And then we've got these guys here. I think I actually put in the wrong missiles here. Let's see. Yeah, I absolutely meant to put striker nuclear missiles on this, not sniper nuclear missiles. Let me fix that. The sniper missiles have a lot more delta V, but they're a lot weaker against laser fire and everything like that, and they just aren't as good in most cases in sort of the normal situations you'd be using them in. The striker missiles are much better for flinging alongside a bunch of flak missiles and doing a joint strike with them together. So let me take a look here and edit this guy. I should be able to just kind of search and replace. Let's see. So we'll take these and we'll replace them with striker nuclear missiles. Here we are, striker nuclear missiles. And thankfully the radiators still cover them. And really I can basically just switch that out without causing too much trouble for the ship. And I think it should make the chip a little cheaper too. Alright, so that's the missile boat. Then we got the standard carrier here. This is my attempt at making a fairly cheap ship that can carry some drones into combat. I just chose the basic Stinger drones because they're fairly cheap and they work well in large numbers. Um, the beam drones are just too expensive in my opinion, and their lasers are too weak anyway. Lancer drones might be interesting. I haven't done much with them. Here, I'll show you what I'm talking about. Let's see. So, you got your beam drones. Too expensive. Lasers too weak. I don't find much of a use case for them personally. The Hellfire drones are cool. They've got 4 cannons in the front. Again, though, quite expensive. Lancer drones have a railgun in the front. The Shooting Star just has like no Delta V. I don't think there's much of a use case for this guy. Maybe shoot it out of a cannon and just use its Delta V for course corrections, but in general, not so much use for it. Also kind of pricey. Almost 1,000,000 credits per. And then you got the Stinger drone. Only costs 280 credits, has 1 cannon in the front, 3 1/3 kilometers per second of Delta V. Some nice reinforced carbon-carbon armor that's actually fairly thick for a drone. You put out a swarm of these guys and you can do some pretty good damage to most enemy fleets. I mean, big lasers are basically their main enemy. The laser frigate will tear up these guys pretty well. But in general, they're pretty good. So that's what I went with for the carrier. Get back to that. And then I gave it a couple of these sniper coil guns just for kind of attacks at range and generally for firing if it's actually in combat directly with another ship. And then it's got 75 Stinger drones with 2 launchers, so it can put them out fairly fast. A swarm of 75 of those drones all together is usually pretty good. Unfortunately, the AI is not great with ranged, with missile and drone attacks. It sends them out real in like penny packet amounts. Doesn't make great intercepts for them. Oftentimes it just misses entirely. I may have to look into, apparently there's a mod that improves the AI quite a bit, and I may need to look into that. I don't have that much interest in doing modded materials, at least not yet, but improving the AI might be fun. So it's got reactors to power either the coil guns or the drone launchers, although it can't entirely do both at once. Runs on decane, again, just for variety mostly, and also to make it a little bit more compact. And let's see, armor scheme. I mean, I like this little silver part here, and I like the making it concave here so that it kind of compresses in. I think it gives it a sort of character. And also it means this front bit kind of protects most of the back, not the actual radiators, but most of the rest of the back of the ship is fairly protected by this little front bulge. So it's got silver, it's got titanium dioxide, it's got aluminum, it's got graphite aerogel, a little bit of aramid fiber. And then this one again is sort of a front cap design. So, well, it's not quite a front cap, but the back 30% is not armored. Because I figured this thing should be facing forwards. Well, it is armored, but it doesn't have the bulk layer. It doesn't have the 1.8 centimeters of Alpha 2 titanium aluminide. Has everything else, but it saves a little bit on weight by not having the back part with the bulk layer. And, I mean, it's fairly heavy and fairly expensive. A lot of this is just because it carries 75 drones. I mean, that's easily 1/3 of its cost. Sniper coil guns aren't too cheap either. You know, the drones plus those coil guns is pretty much half its cost. But that's the standard carrier. And then lastly, we have the Star Frigate. This is sort of my attempt at sort of a smaller version of a gunship or similar. It's got a lot of power. It's got a lot of forward-facing weapons. The idea is just a lot of blasting power and a decent armor for it. So this guy has 8 of those 11mm auto-fire railguns, and it has two 60 megawatt reactors, so it can fire them all simultaneously. And it's also got two sniper coil guns. I think it can't quite fire all those things at once, but it's close. It can fire like 9 out of 10 simultaneously without an issue. And also, I mean, some redundancy is good there too, because some of these might get shot off. If you look inside, the crew modules are back a little bit from the very front, so that they're protected a little bit. Then there's some rad shielding, then the nuclear reactors, then the methane tanks, and then the nuclear thermal rockets on the back. I think this also has RCS thrusters. Let me check. Yes, this also has RCS thrusters to help it turn more quickly. These conventional rockets here on the sides, and then it's got some little oxygen tanks in the front, I think. Yeah. And then in terms of armor, so the main thing with this is that, again, it's a front cap armor, so only the front half of this has the bulk armor, the 2 centimeters of boron filament, because the idea is it's always going to be facing straight forwards towards the enemy. And so that helps save on weight and cost a bit. So let me just do a little bit of quick comparisons between my ships and some of the stock ships, and then I'll go over a little bit more about modules, and then we'll run through a battle. So if I compare the Star Frigate to, say, a gunship, so I've got more Delta V, and I've got slightly more acceleration. In terms of armor, I mean, they've just gone with like straight reinforced carbon-carbon with a little Whipple shield. I've got this sort of multi-level thing. It's not necessarily better than theirs, to be honest. It is lighter. And then mine is a little over half the weight and probably about under a third of the cost. So that's the idea, is this ship you could build, you could have 2 or 3 of these in a battle with the gunship. And, 2 or 3 of these are going to beat a gunship, I would say. From my testing, in general, they will. It doesn't have the flak missile launchers or the 100 megawatt laser, but it's got more auto-fire railguns. It's got half as many sniper coil guns. Heavy coil guns and scatter railguns just aren't that great, honestly. And also, I don't think the gunship can power all of its systems at once. Let me check on it. So this is the gunship. Oh, well, okay. I mean, it's got two 60 megawatt reactors, so yeah, it can't power everything, because, I mean, 439 megawatts scatter railguns. It can't fire those 4 simultaneously, nor can it fire these 4 simultaneously. And if it fires the laser, it can't do too much else at once. So it's got some problems. It's underpowered for what it is, but it's not terrible. Also, it uses aluminum radiators. That's generally a mistake. They're vulnerable to nuclear blasts in particular. And if the crew modules can't get cooled off, then the crew can't fight. So you can't have that. Don't use aluminum radiators. I did that on some of my earlier ships. It was a dumb mistake. So that's the stock gunship there. And then another one we can look at here is a comparison between my laser corvette here. And so it's sort of like the laser frigate. The laser frigate does have the advantage of having a much stronger laser and a bunch of railguns. It's got a ton of these auto-fire railguns. It's a formidable foe. On the other hand, it's more than twice as heavy and almost 4 times as expensive. So I can get 2 of my ships at least facing this guy. And again, I mean, its armor is simpler. I think my armor is probably better on balance, even though it's got the 5 centimeters of reinforced carbon-carbon, which is nothing to sneeze at. And then the other one that's kind of like this, let's see, where did I put that? There's another one of these that's intended to have a bunch of lasers on it. Ah, here it is, the cutter. That's another one that you could compare to a laser corvette. So we've both got 3 lasers. It's got more mounts, but mine has better armor, I'm pretty sure. Then liquid crystal, that's okay. Liquid crystal polymer, I haven't really done much with it. Boron carbide's okay, but it only has a centimeter of each. I've got 2 centimeters of boron and then a bunch of other stuff to boot. Mine is slightly lighter and slightly cheaper, and also has 2 auto-fire railguns, which is better in my opinion than having 4 60mm cannons. Also, I have more Delta V because they inexplicably used a water rocket for this. Not like, a pump it in your backyard water rocket, but like a nuclear thermal rocket that's using water, which just isn't as good. It is kind of cool that they have these like thin, slim armor, or not armor, thin, slim radiators. But I also think this ship might turn broadside to fight, in which case it's just not designed to do that. That's going to be bad for it. So that's sort of a comparison there. If we take my missile boat and we compare it with, say, a missile schooner, so their missile schooner has this dumb front face here, so don't do that. Make sure your ships don't have this front face here. That's going to get hit by incoming fire, and it's just going to destroy it if it's flying straight on. And so my ship avoids that. It has slightly less missiles, and admittedly this guy has a bunch of 60mm cannons. Like, enough that it's going to lag the game quite a bit when it fires all of them. But mine is considerably cheaper. It is actually exactly the same mass, and I think mine is a better armor scheme. Again, it's debatable, but I'd like to think mine has a better armor scheme. So, given that, let me go over a couple more modules that I missed talking about here real quick. So, among weapon modules, 60mm cannon is a good one. 22mm turret cannon is good if you just need a little tiny cannon. Beware putting too many cannons out there. It'll turn your game into a slideshow, especially if they're firing from wide ranges. These ones here, they're just not going to work very well for you. They might blow up your ship. This one here especially is kind of just a joke. I don't think there's any way to make a cannon this big that actually works in any practical sense. It's just going to be too slow to track the target, way too power heavy if you put a turret on it, way too big, way too expensive. It's just not going to work very well. So then railguns wise, this guy is your best friend. This guy is okay. Some of these might be okay if you have the power to spare. I wouldn't bother with this one. It's too slow moving. But this guy here, 7.79 kilometers per second, that's pretty good. It's just a 1 gram round, but, it's firing them real fast. You could put a few of these on your ship and have a lot of outgoing fire. Coil guns, no turret, don't use it. Too big. This one's an excellent one. Cool idea that doesn't really work very well. Too slow firing. This one's extremely well, but then it overheats so quickly. I think it would be firing only once every 3 frames almost immediately because of that overheating. This guy's okay, although I don't know if it really deserves the 100 megawatts it's using. This one's internal, so it's going to be really hard to aim. I don't think there's that much of a use case for it. Lasers, I would say the ones you want to stick with are the 13 megawatt and the 100 megawatt. The others are just too big to use practically and also come with their own turrets, which means you don't build a bunch of additional modules on them, which makes them worse. I'm just looking here. Yeah, they don't have the standalone laser mounts, and so that's just not good. So you want to stick with, the 13 megawatt is nice. 100 megawatt is real nice, especially if you can afford the power draw. Those are both excellent ones to work with. These two are too weak to really do much. In terms of missiles, you might be able to get some good stuff out of Devastator nuclear missiles, but it's hard to get them to actually hit properly. Flak missiles, Striker nuclear missiles. You might have luck with these stage Striker nuclear missiles. In terms of drones, Hellfire drones are cool, but expensive. Lancer drones, there may be a use case for, I'm not quite sure. Stinger drones are a good kind of bread and butter drone. Shooting stars and beam drones, I don't think there's much of a proper use case for. Um, Decoy blast launchers, especially if you're getting hit by missiles, these can be good, especially this large one that puts out big flares with 300 megawatts on them. Blast launchers can be good to surprise the enemy with a swarm of missiles all at once. I didn't use them in any of my designs, but that doesn't mean they're not a good idea. Definitely experiment with them. Now, power plants. One thing to note is there's one special case among these nuclear reactors that can be real useful. I don't remember if I used it much in any of my ships here, but it's good to take a note of. So it's sort of counterintuitive, but in space, you want your nuclear reactor to run hotter. You want those radiators to be running hot, putting out high heat so that you can send out more heat in a small amount of radiator room because it's radiating at a higher temperature and therefore faster. So this reactor operates at 1300 Kelvin. That's pretty good. This operates at 1150 Kelvin. That's okay. It's not good. This one's at 1100. That's really not good. You're gonna need a lot of radiator space for this guy because it's also 60 megawatts of electricity. So, and 211 megawatts of heat at that outlet temperature is going to mean a lot of radiator space to use these guys. Not that you still shouldn't use these for powering your big laser ships and such, but just be aware of that trade-off. Now this here, though, this is a beautiful one. 2000 Kelvin outgoing heat. 8 megawatts. Sure, it's not as efficient, but that outlet temperature means you can get some pretty tiny radiators to cover this. The only problem is that you're going to need a lot of these to power a lot of useful weapons. Unfortunately, you'd need like 13 of these to power a standard auto-fire railgun, and that's just going to be cost prohibitive in terms of crew that you're going to have to put on there. But for your ships that don't use that much electrical power, this is a good choice. Radioisotope thermoelectric generators. Don't use this one. Look at that, 200 Kelvins. Terrible. Again, don't use this one. 240 Kelvins. Terrible. This one's okay, but really expensive. This one's probably your best bet for most use cases for an RTG. I guess this one's okay because it's only 6 kilowatts of heat. Even though it's a terrible outlet temperature, it's still not going to be that much radiator space, but it's not good. Propellant tanks. You want to use the smaller ones typically, so like 100-ton methane tanks typically for building a ship if it's powered on methane, which is a good kind of baseline thing to power your ships on. I don't think Decane has a base tank of that size. I think you have to go 250. Yeah, unless you wanted to build it on 2.9-ton tanks, which I think would probably crash the game with the amount of them you'd be putting in. So that is basically our discussion of modules. So let's go and have a battle here. So I'm going to put these guys over, say, let's put them over, say, Vesta. That would be nice. And I'm going to set both sides to aggressive. That seems to work fairly well for the ships in question that I'm going to use. For the Allied craft, I'm going to give myself a Star Frigate, a Laser Corvette, and a Gunskiff 2.0. This is 11.2 kilotons and 120 million credits. For the enemy craft, I'm going to give them a Laser Frigate. I'm going to give them a Corvette here, which is a pretty good ship. And I'm going to give them a Gunskiff. Actually, I think I remember setting this up differently. This may or may not work. We may end up losing our ships too. But Laser Frigate, Gunskiff, Gunship against Star Frigate, Laser Corvette, Gunship, or Gunskiff, sorry. We have almost half the mass and well under 1/3 the credits cost. And I think our ships can win the battle if they're at least if they get a little bit of luck. So here, I will demonstrate and we'll see what happens. All right. So they're going to start by launching some missiles that probably will never hit us. We'll see what happens. Like I said, the AI is just usually not great at firing missiles in the right directions, although here comes a wave. That's a bunch 20 flak missiles. So again, if they fired like 50, this would work better for them. But I think my laser frigate and to some extent my other ships can handle this pretty well. There we are launching decoys. There go our lasers. There they go. A little worried for a second there, but as they get close in, they get pretty torn up by lasers. All right, so there's that. Here's another wave of flax. Once they run out of flax, our ships should actually close together and actually fight each other directly. Okay, here we are. Here's the big one. Here's our 3 ships. Here's their 3 ships. AI against AI. Let's see what happens. Everybody starts firing. Unfortunately, everybody starts firing conventional guns from a fairly high range, so the game's going to be a bit slow. You can see our shots beginning to cross paths. There we are hitting their railguns on their front of their gun skiff. Looks like that's all that's been destroyed so far. Oh, and there's one of my laser turret mounts going. So here is their gunship. You can see it taking fire, but hasn't had too much serious damage yet. Looks like it's lost a radiator is all. Here's their laser frigate. Those lasers are serious, and also 8 auto-fire railguns is nothing to sneeze at. That's a good amount of firepower there. So far undamaged. And there's their gun skiff. It's already lost all its railguns. All it's got is its conventional guns. And you can see there's lasers, it looks like, attempting to hit those, so they may not be long for this world either. Meanwhile, my ships, here's the Star Frigate, flying straight on. You can see it firing there. You can see its RCS firing. Very dramatic. Laser Corvette, trying to burn to get in closer. Well, that's a nice shot, too. Not quite sure what doing with this directional shot. It really should be aiming straight forwards. Hopefully it figures that out. And here's the Gunskiff 2.0. Again, I wish it was aiming straight forwards, but it's firing its cannons and at least contributing to the lag, if nothing else. Okay, we're taking out their laser turret mounts. Beautiful. All right, we'll pause and take stock in just a second here. Oh no, they got a lucky shot in. They killed our gunskiff crew. That's bad. But at least it's just our gunskiff. It's our smallest ship. And we just disarmed their gunship. So we've both gunskiff. So we've both lost our smallest ships. Here's their laser frigate. It's got 1 laser mount left. Unfortunately, that's still, dangerous. It can still fire from that. Hopefully we'll take that out shortly. It's lost half its rail guns. Lost some of its radiators. And then they've got their gunship. Lost all its scatter railguns, all its lasers, losing its railguns and coil guns. It's going to be pretty much disarmed pretty quickly. It might at that point just freak out and start firing all its flak missiles if it has them. That's usually not very effective, but we'll see. Here's my laser corvette. It's losing a lot of stuff here. It's even lost half its crew, so it's probably only flying at partial strength here. I'll be able to operate only some of its systems. And it's had a lot of laser mounts shot off, but it is still fighting. And then we've got the Star Frigate, which has lost one of its rockets has been shot off, and it's lost a lot of radiators, but it's still got all its rail guns. So unfortunately, the reactor probably can't work at full power right now, so it probably can't fire all those rail guns. But it's at least firing a good amount of them downrange, and we might lose on a lucky shot here, but I think we're going to pull this off. Fingers crossed. As we approach each other at point blank range now. Laser frigate has lost power generation. And the gunship is disarmed. We are victorious. We took some serious damage to our ships, for sure. I mean, you can see this guy is just shot full of holes. Its armor is pretty beat up. A lot of its methane tanks are damaged. It's only got 1.38 kilometers per second delta V left. Only got a few radiators left, but it's still operational. It's still in the fight. Laser corvette, similar situation. Serious damage, took some crew losses. Got just blasted right up the middle here. But again, still in the fight with 2 laser mounts and 1 railgun. And we are victorious against a larger and considerably more, or a heavier and considerably more expensive force. I mean, technically they've still got their lasers, or their flak missiles, and I guess technically we're abandoning the battlefield now because the AI does weird things sometimes, so has sent our ship off to go orbit Sol. But still, I would declare that a victory. There's their ships drifting off derelict into the void. And so, yeah, that's my concepts for stock design. I do also plan to remake the video about module design. I plan to do it in parts this time. So we'll have one part that's about projectile launchers of all sorts. So conventional guns, coil guns, rail guns, blast launchers, carrier modules that launch drones and missiles and things. That'll be one part. One part all about engines. So conventional rockets, nuclear thermal rockets, resistojets, and magnetoplasmodynamic drives. Put all those together. And then one probably about well, lasers, and then what else would go with lasers? Well, maybe lasers and like nuclear reactors and RTGs. Maybe warhead design can go in there at the same time. And then one, I guess, just kind of about the other pieces that don't fit elsewhere. I mean, a lot of that's just cosmetic, but or tailoring for size, basically. But we can go over, crew modules, propellant tanks. Although I feel like about 95% of the time, the answer with propellant tank is just to make it out of vanadium, chromium, steel, and give it a fairly long aspect ratio, and that'll give you the best mass ratio that you can get. So that'll be the plan. It'll take me a while to make all of those, but once I do that, I can set the old video as obsolete because I say some kind of stupid stuff in it, and hopefully give you all a better view of how to build the most effective ships. So thank you very much for watching. Thanks again to UEF Kentoroi, and have a great day.